Velez-Mitchell with JaneUnChained Boycott Meat panel. We are talking about the future. What is the next big vegan IPO? I want to go straight out to an extraordinary woman joining us from Ireland, Claire Smith, who is one of the creators or the creator of Beyond Investing, which is an incredible company that invests in ethical public companies and allows you to create an ETF, an exchange traded fund, where you can be a part of that. You can invest in, for example, Beyond Meat and other companies that aren't killing animals or destroying the planet. So take it away, Claire. What is the landscape looking like now?
Well, what's interesting is that there are a few companies that are up and coming and are positioning themselves for an IPO. It's highly likely that that will be next year. Unlikely it will be before the end of the year, in my opinion. But my understanding is that they have done what are called pre-IPO deals to raise assets with large investors of some hundreds of millions of dollars between a couple of companies. One being Eat Just and the other one being Impossible Foods. And these pre-IPO deals are linked to whatever the price of the IPO would be in 2021. So the companies are clearly positioning themselves to have a good and solid base of investors coming into their stock when it does IPO, because the convertibles that are being done will convert into shares in 2021 when the stock hits the stock market. So I'm fairly confident we will see those in the first half, maybe even, first or possibly second quarter of next year, I would think.
Wow. So this is going to be huge because indeed, when the Beyond Meat IPO launched, and now it's really in 2019, I believe. Seems like yesterday and 100 years ago at the same time. It was the most successful IPO since the 2008 financial crisis. And it totally changed the game in terms of respect for vegan food products amongst the financial community, the establishment, the media. All of a sudden, because in our culture, if it makes money, it gets respect. Plant-based options started getting the kind of respect that it hasn't gotten ever. Okay, so Joe Enriquez Henry, you're on the other side. Claire Smith is doing the financials, and she's in Europe. You are in Iowa, meat country, pig country. What is the reaction of the Iowa agriculture industry to the advent of these meat alternatives?
Well, I mean, clearly, big meat or the food processing industry is somewhat opposed to this, but I think they're prepared. They know that farmers are upset, livestock farmers are upset with the vertical integration that has happened within the industry. The future is pretty clear, move towards plant-based foods. Farmers realize that, activists, consumer activists are pushing for that with our boycott. We're pushing for that too. But yeah, this is a big meat country here in Iowa. And hog production is the #1 in the world here in Iowa. So there is a shifting that is occurring, especially due to the COVID-19 virus. So things are changing. It's going to require more education, more pressure, but consumers want changes. What's happening with workers? Workers want safety in the workplace. So things are going to change. And again, of course, with our consumer boycott.
So how do we marry these two? It seems like you two are sort of on the opposite sides of the same issue. He's dealing with the workers who are suffering and dying of COVID-19 at the meatpacking plants. He's dealing with people in the agriculture industry who are either afraid of plant-based alternatives or maybe hoping to find out if they could cash in on it. You are, Claire, investing in these companies, and you have depth of knowledge with your vegan ETF, which I believe is VEGN, and that has done very well during the COVID crisis. How can we marry these two? In November, we're going to be having a summit where we're going to talk directly to farmers and say, hey, we want to help you transition out of animal agriculture. You can still be farmers, you can still be ranchers, but make something else. So how do we determine what the plant-based industries need so that the farmers can transition to those products, whether it be peas, whether it be mushrooms? Claire.
It's so important that the plant-based industry is not hindered by capacity, and these have been issues in the past. In 2019, I'm aware that there was a huge need for pea protein, and my understanding is that Beyond Meat were very prescient in having bought up pretty much the entire production, which made it quite hard for other plant-based meat manufacturers to find the ingredients that they needed, because at that time, if you recall, a lot of people had been using soy or gluten in the past, but everybody in 2019 wanted to move into pea protein because it's less allergenic and can achieve equally good protein levels, and that was a real problem. So the farmers definitely need to be creating more of the products more of the ingredients that the plant-based product manufacturers want, and potentially switching into novel ingredients as well. I'm seeing some interesting things going on in things like water lentils. More growing of mushrooms. There's a trend towards that at the moment, and algae as well is another area which has the potential to be a fantastic protein source, and can be transformed to be acceptable within these burgers without the unpleasant taste of algae in its kind of raw form. So yes, farmers have a lot of opportunities in this area, but they do need to be thinking about what they can do with their land. What is the best product to go into that could be a source material for plant-based burgers, or maybe plant-based milks. Something like oat is fantastically easy to grow. And so, there's plenty of opportunity for farmers if they want to move in this direction.
Let me jump in and talk about Oatly, because Oatly is another one that has been talked about. In other words, for those who aren't financial wizards, we don't know at this point what the next IPO will be. We do know that there is special purpose acquisition companies, SPACs, that have formed in order to take a very successful plant-based company public. And the article speculates about which company or companies they are going to take public. So the top two mentioned were Impossible Foods, which is a plant-based meat that is I wouldn't say competitor, because they're both aiming for the same goal, to eliminate animal agriculture, but similar to Beyond Meat. And then there's the Eat Just, which has the vegan egg, which you're seeing here. But one of the others that has been bandied about is Oatly. Oatly has taken Europe by storm. When I was in Berlin a couple of years ago, everywhere there were giant Oatly banners. Now it's come to the United States. And a lot of people are saying Oatly has really captured, with its clever marketing campaign, the plant-based sort of ethos and the sort of, it's the in product amongst plant-based milks. Do you think it could be Oatly? What's your best guess if you're allowed to? If you're not allowed to, I don't want to get you in trouble, Clara.
Oh, well, I mean, I have no inside information. And yes, so it would be a pure guess, but there are certain constraints. If you do this kind of structure, you're raising a certain amount of money, but you do need to be looking for a company of a large enough size. And I don't have the numbers in front of me right this minute, but I know that the company, this company called Natural Order, which is the name of this SPAC, which stands for Special Purpose Acquisition Company, has set some ground rules or guidelines as to what kind of what size of company that it needs to buy. And just generally, in terms of the company that a SPAC would buy, it would be usually about 3.5 to 4 times the size of the raise in terms of market cap, which puts it around about the 1.5 to 2 billion mark, which is pretty much where Beyond Meat listed last year. But of course, obviously, it's rallied significantly since that point. The last price of Beyond Meat puts it around an 11 billion market cap, I believe. So Beyond Meat already is well in excess of where this, where the kind of size of company that this SPAC could buy. I would need to look at the details in terms of Oatly, but certainly Oatly already raised quite a bit in its recent raise, and Oatly itself may be pushing up towards that level already in terms of size. So depending on whether they do it immediately or they wait for the next 2 years, and the way that it works with the SPAC is that they have a limited period of time over which they have to do the acquisition. They have to find the company that they want to buy out. So they have up until the next 2 years, which means that it could be plenty of other companies. The plant-based companies are growing very fast. It's entirely possible that there could be another company that comes up that is, that gets to that kind of size, that could be an acquisition target. It may be, in actual fact, a little bit too late for them to go into either of Oatly, Eat Just, or Impossible Foods, because it's possible that those stocks could even list at a higher price, given where Beyond Meat is at the moment and where the market is pitching these companies.
Well, one of the things that is so interesting, I'm getting feedback. I hope nobody's got the audio on in their places. But one of the things that's so interesting is that I lost my train of thought there for a second. The wealthy people, the insiders, can always take advantage of these pre-IPOs. So they get in early and they make good money. And a lot of times, by the time the average person, let's say a vegan consumer who just dabbles in stocks, gets to invest, it's already too late. And we saw that with Beyond Meat. If you didn't jump in right away, it shot up. It shot up. So is there any way for vegans who want to support these companies to get in on the pre-IPO level? Is your vegan ETF exchange traded fund, which has a whole bunch of companies that are compassionate, but I would assume, and I'm pretty sure Beyond Meat is a big part of your portfolio. Do you get in on the pre-IPO level so that your ETF can benefit from that initial surge?
No, the simple answer is no, Jane. Well, as we've discussed before with the vegan climate ETF, it's really an ESG program. So the theme of this panel is the boycott meat roundtable. We're just discussing the boycott meat campaign right now. And essentially what our vegan ETF is doing is that it's applying vegan principles to the stock market. So it's boycotting meat in terms of its positions, in terms of its holdings. So we're doing a kind of rather than a proactive positive screen, we're actually doing a negative screen against the stock index. So we don't have the meat companies. We do have Beyond Meat, but even though it's at 11 billion, you have to compare that to the size of some other companies within the stock exchange, which are much, much larger. And because we're taking a broadly diversified approach to the stock market, we actually have quite a lot of other companies in larger size than Beyond Meat. It's not the biggest holding in the portfolio. That's not to say that that's the only approach that we'll take, though. That's the US Vegan Climate ETF, and we have put together another strategy which is much more positioned towards pure vegan companies. In that portfolio, Beyond Meat does have a larger holding. We also have some other companies in that portfolio which are in the ingredient space, in the agricultural space.
what is that called? I know about your vegan ETF, VEGN. And as I say, it's done very well during the COVID crisis. What is the name of this other place, this other vehicle, investment vehicle?
Yeah, you have to think about it in terms of the size of different companies in the stock market, Jane. So essentially you have the large caps and the mega caps, which are absolutely huge, which are 50, 100, 200 billion or more in size. And that's where the vegan ETF is positioned. Now, I would love there to be pure plant-based companies that are as big as that, but they don't exist yet. There is no large plant-based company, not of that kind of size. We have Beyond Meat, which is the largest one on the stock market at the moment, around about 11 billion. There are some other ingredients companies that are at the 4 or 5 billion area. And so in order to create a sensible portfolio in that area, you can't mix that in with the large caps. You have to basically say, okay, I'm going to have this very focused portfolio in this small to mid cap growth area. And you can put the plant-based stocks in there. And we have put together a portfolio of adequately liquid stocks, around 50 stocks in this portfolio out of around about 100 that we found across the world, all of which are only creating vegan products, but not all of them are creating these specifically vegan products, as in products which are designed to replace an animal product. But they do have vegan products because they are part.
I always say, peanuts. Primarily vegan company. It makes peanuts. It produces peanuts.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that the Boycott Meat panel attempts to do is, we want to boycott meat for obvious reasons, because it's a leading cause of climate change. It's a leading cause of health problems, heart disease. Processed meat is officially cancer causing. Red meat is a likely carcinogen. It's a leading cause of pandemics. We're living in a zoonotic pandemic right now. It's a leading cause of habitat destruction, wildlife extinction, human world hunger, which, the New York Times just did a virtual talk called Feeding the World. Didn't bring up plant-based at all. 4 vegans got on. We asked about plant-based, and the answer really dismayed us. So we did an entire, this morning, an alternative virtual talk, sort of a counteraction to the, I would say, willfully blind New York Times Feeding the World talk. At the very least, animals eat 36% of all crops produced. So you don't have to be a math genius to figure out, if you eliminated animal agriculture, that 36% could go directly to feeding people. It's pretty obvious it's something that needs to be discussed. So here on this Boycott Meat panel, we're also trying to come up with solutions to the crisis of animal agriculture. Listening to this, Joe, how do the two of you, for example, work together? Is there a way to bring either farmers who want to get out, or people who are working in the industry in some capacity who are complaining a lot? The animal agriculture industry is complaining a lot, between the floods and the COVID and the dumping of milk and this, that, and the other. You have actually a suicide rate amongst dairy farmers. So how can we all proactively work together so it's not like you're bad, you're good, but the system is problematical and we can work together to come up with new systems? Sure.
And here it is. I mean, it's science, it's economics. Farmers have to spend a lot of money when it comes to livestock, raising livestock, production of livestock. For small farmers coming into the industry, clearly plant-based production is where it's at. Education is a key thing here. Workers are dying within the food processing industry. Very clear when it comes to the use of animals. We need to go to plant-based. It makes sense not only for workers, for their safety, for their health, but also for farmers who want to get into the industry, vegetables, plant-based, everything there. So clearly what Claire is doing, what we're doing with the boycott, education, talking about the science, talking about the economics. That's what it comes down to. And that will save the animals, save the environment, and also protect the workers. So clearly we have a lot to talk about that resonates on both sides and with communities, with farmers, with workers, with consumers. And drilling down deeper, that type of education needs to happen at the grocery store level, where consumers are going into grocery stores demanding to have an end to meats and to really help us on educating people about plant-based foods.
Now, the vegan sector of the supermarket space in the United States has grown 5 times faster than the overall food sector. So what does that tell you, Claire? And where do you see the tipping point being hit? Somebody the other day, we had on a hedge funder who invests, he's an angel investor into these vegan companies. He said, we've already hit the tipping point. We're rolling through the tipping point right now. Where do you see it?
Yeah, I see there being still very strong growth in this area, and frankly, the market sees that as well. I was just looking at the pricing of these stocks, and Beyond Meat. I think that the last revenues were around the 300 million or so. So on their prospective revenues, maybe let's call it 1 billion. To be kind of very optimistic on next year, that puts them at about 10.5 times revenues at the current stock price. Compare that with Tyson Foods. Tyson's revenues are twice its market cap. So Beyond Meat is trading at 10 times its revenues, let's say, if we're optimistic on the next year. Tyson is trading at half its revenues. The market is telling you that this shift is occurring. The only justification for Beyond Meat's price being that high is that the market expects its revenues to continue to grow year on year at the same pace for a period of time. And it's been pretty much tripling year on year for the last couple of years in terms of revenues, whereas Tyson's revenues are static. And also in terms of the stock price of Tyson has pretty much halved year to date. Beyond Meat stock price has pretty much doubled. So the market is telling you what it expects to happen in plant-based versus meat, and it's only reflecting what it sees in the world around it in terms of the increase in the number of plant-based products on the supermarket shelves, as you say.
So let me ask you a question. JBS, which is one of the world's largest meat producers, a Brazilian meat company, created a vegan product line that has been certified vegan. And I say this all the time because I think it's very significant. The lawyer who does the vegan certification company actually couldn't eat it because she's vegan from birth. And she said she bit into it. It tasted so much like meat, she couldn't eat it. Other people will love that. It tastes just like meat. If these companies are aware that, in fact, one of the heads of Tyson had even said the future of food is likely meatless. If they're aware, okay, why do they hang on? Why not use the COVID pandemic, which is obviously, because the slaughterhouses are a hotbed of COVID globally, created all sorts of horrors and nightmares, not only for the workers who are dying and sick. I'll show you one picture of a worker who... it's very tragic. We've shown many times, but there she is in the hospital, a slaughterhouse worker. Look at that. I mean, multiply that by more than 200 have died and tens of thousands have become infected. This is becoming problematical. It's like any kind of addiction. First it's fun, then it's fun with problems, then it's just problems. The meat industry is becoming just problems. Whereas they are aware, just looking at their financials and their stock price, that of the future, why don't they transition now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree that they should. But the problem is that they are trapped in a situation where they know how to do one thing and the market wants something different. So as much as they're trying to go into the plant-based area, and some meat companies are moving very fast into this area, particularly. Clearly, has moved into plant-based meat. one in Ireland, and there was, I would say, the best plant-based burger that I tasted at a trade show end of last year was actually from a meat company. It wasn't from one of the startups that we know and love. So the fastest movers will go into this space, but some of the largest companies cannot move fast enough and are still desperately trying to export factory farming practices into other areas in order to be able to supply cheap meat. And this is particularly going to be a problem in Europe with factory farm chicken being on the menu to be sent over to the EU from Africa, which I don't think the consumers really want, but it is so cheap that it will swamp the market, undermine local producers, and potentially undermine plant-based businesses. So these are the forces that we're having to deal with.
Well, what is the solution there? Joe, do you have any solution where it seems like the old playbook, cigarette smoking became less popular here in the United States, and then what do? They exported the cigarettes to the third world.
Well, you know, with big tobacco, it took a large, humongous lawsuit, and it took regulation, lots of education. I mean, clearly here, you know, we foresee a number of lawsuits coming out against meatpacking slaughterhouse facilities due to the death of workers, the injury of workers. So there will be a cost connected to these slaughterhouses, and this will be something that they will have to pay out. But in the meantime, it is the education. These slaughterhouses fuel the fast food industry. It is cheap, inexpensive food for people on the run, but we have to educate them. We have to get out there. And again, it's going back to the grocery stores, to the consumer boycott. It will take time because unlike the tobacco lawsuits, we don't have those right now. Those lawsuits provided tons of money to state agencies to provide education, to work on ways to educate young people about the dangers of tobacco. We need the same thing to talk about the dangers of meat, how it impacts the environment, and of course, animals. So it's going to take more time, but we can do it. You know, we're building capacity. We're getting a lot of support online through BoycottMeat.com. We're working with workers, activists, farmers. So we're building a movement. It will take time, but I'm happy to hear what Claire has to say. I mean, it's on the horizon. This industry knows it has to shift, knows it has to retool the slaughterhouse facilities so they are processing plant-based foods. And of course, the same thing with farmers, but clearly with farmers, young farmers coming into the industry, raising livestock costs a lot of money. Planting plants does not have the same cost. So there has to be a shift, and there will be.
So what I'm hearing is we need legal action. And part of the problem, and I was going to put up another headline that's just a very recent headline, is that the U.S. government is very much on the side of the meat producers. Ironically, two of the biggest are not even owned by the United States. JBS is a Brazilian-owned company, and Smithfield sounds very American. It's owned by a large Chinese conglomerate, and I read that it was one of the, if not the largest, takeovers by a Chinese conglomerate of an American company. So why the USDA sides with the producers over the workers is really beyond me, but obviously money talks, and the meat and pharmaceutical industry, which is very connected to the meat industry, because if people went plant-based, they wouldn't need all the cholesterol lowering, erectile dysfunction, and all the other drugs that are sold on, television. Ask your doctor for blah, blah, blah. But for example, this is just a very recent headline. Meat Inspectors Union is saying the USDA enables the meat processors in endangering workers. In other words, the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, is actually siding with the people who own the companies, not with the workers in there who are getting COVID and dying. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Joe? Because you are at ground zero of that problem.
Well, you know, clearly workers are continuing to die. There's a number of lawsuits that are popping up across the country. We're seeing that in Iowa, you know, down in Colorado that has happened. We're hearing about state legislators in Nebraska talking about this, taking on the slaughterhouses. So it is happening. The lawsuits are happening for personal injury, personal deaths. Clearly the federal government has tried to stop this, try to make this industry essential industry, which it is not. So these things are happening. Of course, we're coming up to November 3rd. Some decisions are going to be made on Election Day on how things may shift, on how possibly the CDC will have more strength, how there will be more regulation through OSHA to make sure that these facilities are inspected on a regular basis, how there might hopefully be mandatory public testing of workers. But again, going back to the tobacco industry decades ago, all the research that came out, it required regulation, it required lawsuits, it required attorney generals throughout the country in many, many states filing lawsuits against big tobacco. That needs to be the same here. Now, there has been legal action against the slaughterhouses on price fixing, but it needs to shift to the dangers in the workplace and the production of meat, processing of meat.
Have you reached out to, and then we'll get back to the money part. Well, it's all money, but Joe, have you reached out, or anybody with Boycott Meat reached out to some of the big companies that, you know, the Aaron Brockoviches of the world who have taken on industry? They know how to do that. The law is a very specific thing. You can have the most well-meaning attorney, but if they're chasing car accidents and you need somebody who's very familiar with, for example, the USDA or the Environmental Protection Agency or one of these agencies, is there an effort to get one of these law firms that's famous for tackling this kind of issue? You said price fixing. Mm-hmm. The legal team that tackled the slaughterhouse industry on price fixing, they'd be the best ones probably to go after the slaughterhouses on this issue.
Sure. And Jane, that is happening right now. There is one major law firm. I can't really disclose their name right now. They're focused on the death of workers in Waterloo, Iowa. So that's a Tyson facility right there. So you're going to see something happen down the road. So Tyson is going to be one of the major defendants in this lawsuit that will be happening. But there'll be many more. You know, these three big slaughterhouse processing companies, they're all going to be looked at. And again, yes, there will be legal action, and there will be some big names out there that will put forth these lawsuits. So time's going to show what's going to happen. It's not going to happen right away, but it is underway. The investigations are happening.
Wow, that's big news. I was not aware of that. So Claire, again, you are, I don't know if you're the founder or a co-founder, but it's Beyond Investing. You've created the Vegan ETF Exchange Traded Fund, VEGN. You have a big portfolio, but the company, the criteria for figuring out whether you're going to invest in a company is, do they hurt animals? Do they hurt the environment? That sort of thing. And so I think I remember seeing it. You saw Tesla, because Tesla uses vegan leather. They've popularized vegan leather. That's in your portfolio, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. You've got Beyond Meat, you've got others. Are you excited about the possibility of having, for example, an IPO with a dairy-free alternative? What's the buzz? You're in the financial world. I'm very excited, just because I don't think I ever had a happier day than when the Beyond Meat IPO came out and everybody was celebrating and my neighbors were giving me more respect. And hey, how about that Beyond Meat? Because in our society, money talks. You know, the same people I could talk to till I'm blue in the face about vegan alternatives, if they see something opening the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, wow, we've arrived. You know, so it culturally, not just financially, but culturally, it's such an important point. What's your prediction? I understand you have no crystal ball, you have no inside information, but what's your prediction about IPOs? Could we see a slew of them? Could we see Impossible Burger eat just with the vegan egg, Oatly with the milk, and maybe 2 or 3 others.
Yes, I think we could, and we can certainly see some other ones coming up behind. In Europe, certainly in the plant-based meat, there's a few large producers in that area. I would, yeah, and I would suggest also in Asia. And Asia actually possibly could see the first companies to list in the cellular agriculture area too, because I see them going ahead maybe slightly faster. Mostly because of mostly because of easier regulation. That's likely to be the case in that area.
When you say cellular agriculture, are you talking about cultured meat, which is meat that is?
Yes, sorry, that's what
a few molecules of an animal, but you don't have to kill large numbers of animals to have the cultured meat, which is literally biologically meat.
Yes, exactly, and I think that will be a game changer when it comes to the market. I mean, for a meat company or even any company in the food manufacturing area, the real wake up call with Beyond Meat was that food companies could be growth companies. There's been no real growth in the food sector. And there's been very little in the way of innovation for a very long time. It's all been about just marketing and putting different marketing spin onto the same products. And so this fusion of the trend towards the vegan products being enabled by technology has created these high growth companies in a sector that historically has been pretty moribund. And this is where the excitement is. And if you're a CEO of these large food manufacturers, you really need to hop on board with that, because otherwise your shareholders are going to be pretty upset that you're staying in these old damaging industries which are at risk of lawsuits, which are contributing to environmental damage and to the climate. And so you're going to get attacked from all sides. And by the way, they take a lot of public subsidies. They're getting enormous amounts of subsidies. And if they're damaging the environment but getting subsidies, then the public's going to, sit up and take notice on that, and they're not going to want it.
That is an issue that gets to our corrupt system, where and this is a bipartisan issue. I mean, the legislative branches, the executive branch, it seems sometimes they seem like all working just for corporations. And so just the idea that we're subsidizing, there's a lot of people that say the dairy industry would be gone if it weren't for the government subsidies. Mm-hmm. And they're not just here in the United States, they're in Europe as well. They're in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. Because kids aren't waking up in the morning and drinking a glass of cow's milk anymore, the breast milk of the cow. They're more likely to want a green juice. And so one of the reasons why dairy is in special trouble, despite the subsidies, is that kids, because of COVID, weren't in the classroom. That you need a teacher's note in some places, in many, many places, in order to have a plant-based milk for your child, even though the vast majority of people are allergic to the breast milk of cows. So, that's another part of the puzzle. And that needs to be addressed. But good luck with that. That might be the final holdout. I think that the marketplace might actually come up with a better vehicle to eliminate animal agriculture than the government, which is so many of the agencies of government are completely co-opted by the animal agriculture industry, whether it's the Interior Department or the National Institutes of Health or the USDA or the executives of those industries have infiltrated these agencies. So you're not going to get the kind of response that you want to get. And they've also, infiltrated agencies that are sub-agencies. So that's a very, very, I find it a very morose subject. Anyway, I think that we've covered most of it. Can we get some final thoughts? And do you think that this has been a productive conversation in terms of inspiring thought processes? Imagine if there was an agency that took ranchers who wanted to get out of, and I don't mean a government agency, it could be a private agency, ranchers and farmers who want to get out of animal agriculture and team them up with companies that need certain food products, and then establish the geographic proximity, the supply chain, and all of that. So instead of a rancher, which we deal with all the time, just in the last couple of days, we've done interviews with ranchers who want out and they just don't know how to get out. Why should they have to reinvent the wheel? Why can't there be a one-stop shopping place where they can go and say, here's how many acres I have, here's how many animals I have, this is what I want to do. Okay, let's match you with a company that's in your vicinity that needs blah, blah, blah that you could grow on your land. There's not a lot of coordination. I'm fond of saying, you want to go buy a car, you go click, and you've got a website with 4,000 cars. Doesn't mean that they're all appropriate for me. I may not want an all-terrain vehicle, but I get to look at the whole picture and then click closer and closer as to what I'm looking for. There's nothing like that exists. So we are forcing these farmers and ranchers who want out, especially now during COVID when they're being forced to depopulate their animals. They always had to, like, for example, in the egg industry, the hens, when they're considered spent after a short period of time, a couple of years, they're not producing eggs as quickly, gas them all and bring in new hens, baby hens. So the COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated problems that already existed. There are a lot of farmers who want out, but they have no clue. How are they going to get out of their bad loans? Blah, blah, blah. There needs to be a place to help them and match them with people who need products. Claire, can you address that? Is there any way that this can come together?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's two sides to what you're proposing, Jane. And one is definitely the supply chain and making that transparency of information, letting that information flow from the companies creating the products and seeing the growth in the sales of the products through to being able to tell the farmers what they want to have grown. This is one of the reasons that I created a platform which is called Beyond Animal, which is about transitioning away from the use of animals in order that all the participants in this area can be on the platform and can share this kind of market intelligence. And we'd certainly welcome any kind of farming organization, obviously, especially veganic farming, but any kind of crop farming organization or group of farmers that would like to come onto the platform and get the benefit of that market intelligence from the people who are producing the products going into the shops to say, this is where we have dislocations in our supply chain, and this is the product that we're going to need next year in order to scale up our production. So that's part one. Part two is the financing. And this could come from government. It would make certainly a lot of sense for government programs to be enabling this transition, because there would be such huge benefits from the perspective of the monetary policy, not having to put billions towards the meat industry anymore, from the climate policy in terms of reducing the level of emissions, and also from other types of environmental pollution as well. And then let's also say we've got health policy and reducing the cost to the health system. So it does make sense for it to be a government program. But if that can't be accomplished, we can also look at things like green bonds. There's a lot of insurers out there that are under pressure to move their assets into the kind of projects which are behind things like the Green New Deal, and they're looking for projects, but they don't see enough of them, and they don't see enough size. And I think if the banks can securitize the subprime loans in the year 2006, 2007, and aggregate all of those into a tradable instrument, a bond that people are prepared to buy, why can't we aggregate all of this this need for financing from many, many, many different farmers into a bond, which then can be bought by these large institutions? That's what I'd like to do.
Oh my gosh, that is like one of the best solutions I have ever heard. Instead of, because one of the big problems with the farmers is that they stick them in these big debts. And so they've got these big mortgages, they've got these giant facilities. They're making pennies per animal. Pennies. And it's a miserable life. And many of them want out, but they're stuck in the loans. They have a choice of declaring bankruptcy and walking away from it all, but sometimes they'll lose that family farm that's been in for generations. So they need a way out. So what you're saying is take all of their mortgage debt, combine it into a big giant collective, and then have it underwritten by a some kind of financial entity that is going to then put that same land to use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there could actually be a government guarantee, frankly. I think it makes perfect sense that there would be a government guarantee across all of those loans in order to, you know, to attract the private investment market, the institutions into to put up the money. Because at the end of the day, what are the farmers farming? They're farming the land. The land is the country. So it makes sense in a way. And this is preserving the country. It's improving the countryside. It's preventing the country from being despoiled. It's allowing that country to dramatically reduce its carbon emissions. So absolutely, it makes a lot of sense to have some kind of private-public partnership here, with the government underwriting the programs and the private sector putting in the money.
I agree with you 100%. I find the government, along with the media, to be the most intransigent of all entities, even much more than the ranchers or the farmers. They're more open-minded. So it may end up being something where you know more about financial instruments than I do, how you create some kind of bond to buy all this stuff up and then sell it to people that are, there has to be a repurposing of the land. There has to be, I
think your group with the ranchers advocacy, if they can basically make a plan for it's like a roadmap or a framework for multiple different types of farms in different areas, so that they have a kind of like, okay, you're here, you were doing this, now you can do that, and the easiest switch for them to make, and then basically map that out over the whole country. That would be a very interesting project. And that would be a very highly diversified project as well, because you'd have some farmers moving to growing hemp, other farmers moving to growing mushrooms. You wouldn't have this thing where all the farmers are growing either soy or corn, and they're growing commodity crops where they're at the vagaries of the market in terms of, you know, when they come to grow, when they come to sell their crops. You know, they would be actually producing higher value products. So I think if you could, if there could be some kind of a mapping exercise across the US in terms of what farmers could do, and give them some models to follow, then you could certainly scope out a massive transformation. Yes, I think it would make a lot of sense, and it's the kind of thing that should get government approval, because with the financing, these new farms would likely be profitable and would not need the billions that the meat industry gets every year.
Well, I would like you to just explain that one more time so that I understand exactly what you're suggesting, because I think it's brilliant, and it's one of the first. People love to talk in generalities, and we need to transition farmers. But the question is how? And each farmer is unique with a unique set of circumstances. But you're saying that you have a plan. So tell us what your proposal is in people terms.
Well, I mean, my proposal in people terms would be, I mean, every farm is in some way individual, but within certain areas, you have multiple farms and their problems are common. And so you have a way to kind of replicate, in some ways, the solution. So it's not on a one-by-one basis, but you can say, okay, this is similar to that one, and we can propose this solution. But then across a broad area like the US, you would have literally hundreds and hundreds of projects. And so this starts to look like a diversified portfolio because you can price the thing in a way which is sort of standardized across them, but you are also getting this diversification of different projects. So they're not all going to do the same thing. And so that actually is quite a nice pool of assets for a bond. And it would be a green bond because you could show that the projects were improving the environment and reducing the climate effect. And so it would be a very saleable instrument because it would be made up of many, many projects that would require financing, but then post the financing, they would have cash flow, they would be able to pay back the bond. And as I said, because there is obviously this benefit to the country through a cleaner environment, healthier people, less waste, less pollution, less climate impact. This is the kind of thing that the government should be prepared to underwrite. What that means is underwriting basically means protect against losses. It doesn't mean that the government needs to put money into the program, but if they protect against losses, then you will see private funding come in.
Wow. What do you think of it, Joe Enriquez Henry?
I think it's terrific. I mean, this is a way that we can transition from livestock to crop farming. Farmers need help. Workers need help in these industries, the food processing industry. This would be a way to do an excellent transition. So I totally agree.
Okay. Well, listen, I think that this has been a very productive conversation. Claire, we have to talk more offline about how to make this happen, who could get involved. You have a depth of knowledge that is so far beyond mine when it comes to these kinds of financial instruments, if that's what you want to call them. But I think you've hit on something. We talk about this ad nauseum, but there are very few people offering concrete solutions. And that's what we need. We need concrete solutions, game plans. So I think we've got two. We've got the bond that would buy up the debt of the farmers and then help them come up with alternatives. On the other side of that, is there another group or another entity then telling them what they need to grow to feed the demands of the private companies like the Beyond Meats that may use more things like pea protein than something else?
I think there is a certainly room for this information to be disseminated better. And for there to be possibly a kind of a clearinghouse for this information. I know that the plant-based manufacturers, obviously, they have their IP, their recipes. They don't want to kind of share those recipes with their competitors. But it would make sense if there was, well, without going too much into a controlled economy, but if there was some way for the farmers' associations to be talking with those manufacturers, the bigger manufacturers, to see what it was that they would anticipate needing in order to produce the products, according to the growth that they saw in those products. And I would say that at the moment, it feels as if the farmers' associations feel very, very much on the defensive, and that they feel like they're being forced to change and that their product isn't wanted anymore. I think with a much more open approach, and also with the fact that we are seeing plant-based trade associations. There was just a European Alliance for Plant-Based Foods, which was created quite recently in Europe, in fact. With those types of trade associations, we have the opportunity to pool that information between the plant-based food manufacturers and then disseminate that information to the farming associations and organizations. And that's probably the best way to do it, using the existing structures.
Wow. Well, this is very interesting material. We have a summit coming up November 21st where we're going to talk about evolving beyond animal agriculture. So we will keep you posted on all of that. I want to thank Joe Enriquez in Iowa and Claire Smith in Ireland. Two eyes, very far apart. I'm in Los Angeles. It was so great. What an informative conversation. Thank you both for all you do. And please support Boycott Meat. You just go to boycottmeat.com, sign up, be part of the solution. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Bye-bye.
Bye.